りおしまい。
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
and your host on the right, Brock,
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. On this episode, we're talking about Dragon Ball as usual, and in particular, episode 106, which is titled in the English, Terrible Tambourine, or in the Japanese, Maju Tambourine Comes.
Maju.
So, before we get into that, if you like what you hear in this episode, please give us a like. Subscribe to our channel by hitting that red subscribe button below. We upload new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube and Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble, so follow us on those platforms. I think that's pretty much it before we get started. Is that right, Brock? Do you have anything to mention?
No. I'm just excited to jump into essentially everything that's ramping up to King Piccolo and his influence. Oh, it's good.
Oh, yeah. So let's go ahead and get started with episode 106, Terrible Tambourine. So the first thing we see is Yajirobe attempts to roast the corpse of Symbol over a flame, but the flesh won't seem to cook. After smelling the meat, Yajirobe begins to eat the flesh raw, telling Goku that raw meat is the best. He proceeds to pick the bones clean and complains that it wasn't enough. Goku tells him that as long as he has the Dragon Ball, more enemies like Symbol will continue to hunt him. Offended, Yajirobe tells Goku to go away, but Goku tells him that he will need to borrow the Dragon Ball to revive Krillin before expanding upon the power of the Dragon Balls. At last, Yajirobe marvels at the idea that a simple stone could grant any wishes at all. And so this first sequence, we see Goku kind of reconciling his issues with Yajirobe, and it's done in such a way as between the events of the last episode and this episode, where Yajirobe eventually wins the rock paper scissors contest and gains Goku's respect by defeating Symbol. That now they're operating on a grounds where Goku can trust him with the knowledge of the Dragon Balls, despite the fact that Yajirobe has shown no inclination as to trying to help him.
Mm-hmm. And there's also that aspect of Yajirobe that is essentially embodied, right? So we had talked in the last episode about how he has the appetite that Goku doesn't have. And so we see that here in this part where Yajirobe is essentially so ravenous that eating the enemy that Goku couldn't even contend with originally, whenever he had fought him when he was hungry, right, is not enough to satiate Yajirobe. And so we see the sort of the source of Yajirobe's strength there, right? That we've been introduced in the last episode.
Yeah, it's his insatiable appetite, and it's almost that integration because it's kind of that idea that um, it's a primeval idea that the things that you eat become your strength, let's say. And so Yajirobe kind of embodies that in the way that he deals with food, in the way that he accepts food. He hasn't humbly accepted, let's say.
Right,
He more greedily accepts and tries to integrate as much as possible as far as his appetite. And like we've been saying, there's a parallel with him and Goku in the very beginning of the series and his self sufficiency, but this is an expanded form of that. And it's that spirit that Goku once inhabited of self sufficiency tied in with the honor and tradition of the samurai, and it's combined to make this ravenous and sturdy figure being the mysterious boy Yajirobe.
right. So, and we had sort of talked about how the samurai aspect of his character design fits into that, with him being in this constant process of being that uh it's almost like walking a certain hermetic path to be a samurai in the first place.
Right. It is following it's Goku as if he followed the hermetic path and closed himself off from all but the wilderness, right? Um the strength that would be endowed in such a way. He also obviously appreciates the wisdom within the Dragon Balls because he carries it around his neck, even though he can't articulate the reason why, which is expanded on later in this episode. But he has that reverence, but he's also secluded himself in the wilderness.
Right. And he hasn't ascended above the wilderness, right? He hasn't gone up, for instance, to eat a senzu bean and to understand, to integrate the idea of
Well, yet
controlling an
exactly,
appetite,
yes,
right?
yes.
Controlling your physical instantiation. So
And,
Goku has grown spiritually, but we see physically it's sort of grounded again here with Yajirobe.
Well, it's interesting too that Yajirobe tells him that eating symbol wasn't enough. And that I think is the reason why his hunger is insatiable, is because at his present moment he's not challenged enough by anything for that appetite to actually be satiated in a spiritual or meaningful way. And so even though he's able to physically, and obviously he's a little chunkier in stature than Goku, even though he's able to substantiate that hunger in a physical way, it's not spiritually satiated, and so he continually needs to eat.
Right. And I think it is the fact that it's shown against Goku's strength to be of equal physical strength is to show that, like, okay, we've gone through this very spiritual strength arc for Goku, right, with him experiencing that pole of spirituality from the top of Korin's tower down to, Baba's tower, right? There's this whole theme all the way up through the end of the last tournament saga that's about that spiritual strength. And so this is a regrounding of things. That's to say that, like, that's only half the picture, and that Goku walking in the world without a specific articulation of his spirit, let's say, would still be able to he would still be a powerful instantiation. You know what I mean? That, like, there's this idea that you don't have to have a specific wisdom to be a good person.
Hmm. I agree, and I just want to add that Goku's the way they measure up in the last episode isn't like Goku's full power or anything like that. It's just kind of a gauge that measures them somewhat equally, right?
Right.
And like the Kamehameha wave is not used, things like that are actual spiritual powers that Goku has been able to adopt, where Yajirobe does lack that ability. So it's really purely a physical contest, and in that
Mhm.
regard, you're right; they are equal. And so, having gained that respect from defeating Symbol and devouring his corpse, Goku tells him the power of the Dragon Balls and that they can grant wishes.
Now that's
He
an obvious
also,
parallel, right?
yes, um, it's the sustenance of the sustenance, right? It's the superordinate, and you can go ahead.
Well, yeah, he literally consumes a dragon, and then he takes in the wisdom that the dragon represents, which is that there is the treasure to be discovered in the chaos of challenging yourself, of putting yourself out there to be at the edge of what you can take, right? To confront the unknown, and that's sort of the dragon of chaos, the dragon ball, right? And so, literally, whenever he ingests the dragon, it's like the way that Yajirobe comes to know the world is that he like ingests it into
And
himself.
it's a very bestial and primordial way to interpret the world is orally, right? And I mean,
Yeah,
that's what animals do,
that's what babies do
and that's
whenever
what
they're
babies do. Yeah.
whenever a baby, like if a baby has a toy, it'll put it in its mouth because its tongue is really good at mapping out the shape of something and understanding it, right? Because we come to understand the world in a sequence of ways, right? This is sort of the a lot of psychologists have looked into sort of the developmental process of babies and how they come to understand the world and where consciousness would come from, right? And it seems to start at this oral phase and then it goes to hands and then hypothetical articulations come after that, right? And so there's an order of operation. So yeah, you're right. The understanding of the world or taking in the world through like eating it, through literally ingesting it, is that sort of primordial base that we said that Yajirobe is representing for Goku here, that he needs
And
to
not just representing,
reground
but it's like
himself,
the
right?
mastered version of it, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
Goku as if he didn't know anything else.
Exactly.
Um, and another thing that I want to mention is that Goku compares Yajirobe with Krillin.
Right.
It's very interesting because the same way that Krillin was a shadow aspect of Goku, Yajirobe is, as we've already explained, that same thing. And Goku's able to recognize the pattern even though he's not able to articulate it.
Right. Immediately calls it out because this is the first person to rival Goku that has a relationship to Goku since Krillin died.
Yeah.
And so Goku immediately recognizes that um there's this element of Yajirobe that he can see himself in, right? Like Goku is able to look at people and see something that he understands about the world in somebody else and say, "Oh, like I recognize this about you." And he recognized that in Krillin and he's also recognizing it in Yajirobe.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because they're symbolically aligned, but also it's sort of that's that's the ability that someone who is on the path has, right?
Right. And Yajirobe doesn't really understand what he even means by that.
But he has the Dragon Ball.
All he does is imagine himself without a nose. And so he at last marvels at the idea that the Dragon Balls can even exist, which makes sense for someone who has been uninitiated into the idea of ascending past um, ascending past the present mode of being using the spirit of unattained wisdom.
Right.
And so he is aghast by that idea. And then we move on to uh, Tambourine's next attack. So, elsewhere in a peaceful village inhabited by woodland animals, a father bear and his son sit by a river fishing. When the father catches a fish, Girin, the monster beast from the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, swoops in and catches it, saying that he humbly accepts and devours the fish. The son tells him that Kami-sama's punches are definitely going to hit him, and he attempts to retaliate by swinging at the boy. At the last moment, however, Tambourine arrives, catching Girin by the tail, and Tambourine tells Girin that he's next to die. Girin begins to fight back, seemingly to the surprise of Tambourine. However, Tambourine is simply making sport of him, and he easily breaks free of his or guru gum before killing him. The young boy and his father rush to attack Tambourine.
To
Oh,
thank
to
him.
thank Tambourine, and Tambourine slices the father's chest, telling him that he isn't Kami-sama. He then drops the mark of the demon on Monster Beast Girin's body and flies away. So here we see another instance of the rampage that Tambourine is inflicting upon the martial artists in the dragon world, the next being Monster Beast Girin. There's a couple things that I think are important to mention here. The first one being how Monster Beast Girin humbly accepts.
Right. So what we just talked about in the last was that Yajirobe wasn't humbly accepting, right? And so there's this it's a joke, right? It's a perversion of that idea, which is that he Tambourine considers himself to be of a stock so far above uh the inhabitants of this world that he considers them food. And so whenever he sees him he says, "I humbly accept," which is it's a combination of that and an insult toward his spirit, which is to say that like that no basically Girin doesn't even possess the level of malice within himself to be able to confront him. And so in that sense he is just prey.
I mean, I was gonna mention the perversion of the idea of humbly accepting, right? Like we've
Right.
seen Goku express that idea of humbly accepting from something that he thinks that he's earned, right? Or that has presented itself to him. And in this instance, it's obvious that Girin is perverting that idea and making a mockery of it and at the same time, which all the more makes it fitting that the father and son think that the, let's say, avenger to their cause is God, because who would punish the actions that Girin is taking of being selfish and ruling by might and being a despot and a bully, right, other than God? And so they think that it's Kami-sama himself that is the one stopping Girin from destroying them.
But it's funny because it's a parallel to the fishing in the sense that what really happened was that he was simply the fish being caught out of the water and killed.
Mm.
And so he calls him his prey, right? He says, "I humbly accept," in the same way that he's like there's that idea that he humbly accepts this fighter as his prey, you know. And so they run up to him to thank him and he's like, "Don't thank me. I'm just a bigger fish," right? Like and then he leaves the mark
Well,
of the
not only
demon,
that,
which
but he
is to
slices
identify
his, he
himself.
shows his malice. He says, "Don't think," like
Right.
he makes it clear that he's not acting in a righteous way whatsoever, but he's only acting with malicious intent, not even to his own ends, but to ends that are even more malicious than his. And so he exhibits that by threatening the father bear of the duo, and then he, like we said, drops that mark on the body, and that, as we said, is that calling card and that antithesis to the anonymity required of a heroic spirit,
Exactly.
um for the malicious and the adversarial spirit that is Piccolo.
Right. You can think of other franchises where the name is extremely important. Think of Star Wars, right? Where now you're Darth Vader and you have to leave the fear of the name of Darth Vader all over the world.
Well, think of the Joker. He actually
He literally
occasionally leaves cards, right, like
right,
that.
yeah. There's that idea that's a demoralizing factor that's part of it, right? To say that there is a spirit above you and it's me and to be a threat and to strike fear in people, right? It is like to leave an echo of fear in the world so that people will, you know, feel the fear that you can inflict, but over time, almost,
And that's happened
permanently.
too. Anyone that's been afraid, let's say, to get on an airplane because of terrorist attacks, or uh, go to a school, whatever, right? Anyone that's felt that fear, is that's the product of the people who perpetrated these attacks. It's not just that they want to inflict the harm at the time, but they want their harm to exist further in the future.
Right. That's why they target specific things like that. Why someone would shoot up a school, right? Because
Right,
it's
because
not
people
really
go to
about
school every day,
yeah,
right?
It's about being against the idea of it, and I think that's why this is happening in a peaceful village, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why it does have to happen in a peaceful village. And so, like we said, the mark is dropped uh, by Tambourine, and then he flies away, seemingly to find his next victim.
Right.
So, as he does so, we see that at Kame House, at its new location, Yamcha trains while Bulma reminds him not to overexert himself due to his leg injury. Bulma then comments that it's highly unlikely that King Piccolo would be able to find them since the world is a big place. Then Tambourine immediately stumbles upon them and asks for coordinates to their old house. Bulma remarks that they used to live at those exact coordinates, and Tambourine then recognizes Yamcha. The two square off, and Yamcha is able to hold his own until his leg injury causes him to falter. Launch then fires her machine gun at Tambourine, but he flexes and shrugs off the bullets. Just before Tambourine's fatal blow lands on Yamcha, Piccolo intervenes by calling out to Tambourine through telepathy. He's then ordered to immediately head out to kill whoever killed Symbol, and is told by Piccolo that he is several times more powerful than
Simba.
Simbo. I love it. Symbol. Uh, Tambourine tells Yamcha that it is his lucky day, and even though he will return to finish the job later. So this little instance here, it's very interesting that it's almost happenstance at the beginning, but it's also, in my opinion, it's to instantiate, and I think why Toriyama put it in here, it's to instantiate that no area is actually safe.
Yeah, I think it's actually hilarious that what's happening here is that Bulma is thinking that you could hide from the spirit
Mm.
that
Yes.
Tambourine represents. And so she comments that because the world is a big place, we should be able to hide from this. And it immediately stumbles upon them accidentally. And because Bulma is so confident that they could hide from him, she tells him explicitly who they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way that anybody, no matter how menacing they seem, could possibly be that person because she thinks that being able to relocate to obfuscate yourself is the same as actually having full anonymity and being invisible, actually being able to fully avoid a spirit like him, a powerful idea in the world, right? Which is
Right, and there's
again
nowhere that's safe
Bulma's
from it now.
it's Bulma's weakness in character though, right? That we're seeing.
Well, kind of. You can't blame her too much because the fact that pre 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, right, there was no place in the world for this evil, and so to her that makes sense. Would they have been able to hide from the Red Ribbon Army on this island? Yeah,
Sure.
but this isn't the same kind of spirit, and that's what she doesn't understand. Not only
Exactly.
is it not the same kind of spirit, but now since the spiritual father has not abdicated, but now that he has stepped down in the sense that he is no longer keeping back the chaos of the world, um so such that the new generation can begin to integrate that and accept it into their being, that all of this has begun to happen.
Right. And this is happening to all contestants of the Tenkaichi tournament, which is to say that
Any who
people who
would
follow
see,
the teaching of the spirit of the father
yeah,
will experience this thing because the spiritual father has taken a specific role who is a representative of that whole tournament, right? And so
yes.
this is everything that is happening to everybody is a result of essentially Master Roshi's change in his role in the world, in his abdication, right?
Right, that and Pilaf's actions, as we've seen, and as we're going to continue to talk about as we go on. Actually, I don't think we see Pilaf much in this episode,
No.
but that's okay. Um, so a couple more things I want to mention is, so we already talked about Bulma's naivete and how as the let's say, as the archetypal feminine, she expects the masculine to be there to protect the world from de- let's see devolving into chaos, let's say. And so that's kind of where she's coming from in that regard, right? It's because of that mode of being that she's adopted. After all, Goku's protected her, Yamcha's protected her, even Dr. Brief has protected her in a sense. So we've seen these let's say masculine figures protecting her throughout, and so now she thinks that the not only the ideas of Master Roshi, because it was his idea to move it, right, but the also that those forces that are in play from those masculine figures will be victorious in their endeavors against Piccolo.
And of course, this conversation that Bulma's having is actually with Oolong, as she's
Has to
essentially
be with Oolong, basically. Yeah,
speculating that they would be safe, right?
yeah,
Um, which is exactly the thing that's different about Launch, who is more integrated with her masculine side and has the appropriate sort of feeling towards him, right? It seems, but it's Bulma who immediately just says, "Hey," and lets him know, right? Whereas we see that this is kind of the equivalent to Blue Launch, just being like, "Oh, hello, welcome to come into the home, right? Come into the home
right. Yeah,
coordinates."
yeah, yeah.
But that's not the case with Blonde Launch, and so that's really the weakness of Bulma still, and what sort of remains Bulma's crucial
Some of
character
her
flaw.
weaknesses, yeah. I mean, there's more than one still.
Yeah,
We're going to continue to work those out as we go. But you're right, because uh, as Yamcha continues to fight Tambourine, Launch helps him by shooting her machine gun at the demon. Uh, and I think that's indicative of her powers of judgment and her, let's say, discerning eye as the masculinized version of the feminine spirit, or let's say masculine integrated feminine spirit. She is able to both judge and I'll just say judge,
yeah,
I
it's the
guess.
judgment of the feminine spirit.
Right, and so that's kind of embodied in what how she acts here, and how she reads Tambourine to be false and then attacks him with her machine gun even though it doesn't work. And we've seen before, right, the
Yes.
judgment of the feminine spirit wouldn't work on Tambourine because of who he is, but would it work on Roshi? Absolutely. And that's why we see it work on Roshi and not Tambourine. There's a reason to these
However, there is
jokes,
somebody
let's
else it
say.
didn't work on, right? And that's the Crane Hermit,
Oh yeah.
because he catches her bullets, catching her off guard. And so this is an extension of that, right? This there's this progression that we're introduced to towards this level of malice that doesn't care about being judged negatively by the pure feminine spirit.
Yeah, but I would say I would agree, but unlike Crane, like Tambourine doesn't
He
actually
doesn't even have to
care.
stop it, right?
Um,
It's he's above.
well, Crane does care. Like
Yeah,
Crane is
Crane
coming
hair.
over and like
Yeah,
trying to be like, "Hey, ladies," and hitting on them and stuff like that. But this is the antithesis of like he really. It's not about um being such that one would find Tambourine a good mate. It's nothing like that. It's purely malice motivated, and the evil that King Piccolo has instilled inside of his creature here in Tambourine. And so
right.
he is unaffected completely by the judgment of Launch.
And that's kind of what I want to say is like, because Crane Hermit is malicious, but he's a lower sort of level of maliciousness.
Mm,
He can willingly catch those bullets to protect himself, right? So he's acting as though he were unaffected by the bullets. He's not unaffected necessarily because it's something that he engages with. Whereas the thing that he's acting out that is actually truly malicious, which is what he was essentially acting in that malicious way whenever he caught them before. But what's the true malicious representation would be completely unaffected, like psychopathy, right?
mm-hmm.
Someone like there's no malice in the world like the sort of psychopathy that you get from like serial killers, right? Where the real terror sort of comes from the fact that you see that there's really not an empathy towards, you know, what somebody thinks of them, or just generally towards other people, right? And that's what he has represented in his whole reign of, or not reign, but I would say tour of terror, right? Which is
Tour of terror.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is as he's gone around sort of giving people a glimpse of that, right?
Sure, yeah, yeah. And so as he spreads that terror, right, like that's a more of a distinction between him and Crane. It's more of an expansion of those ideas,
Yeah.
right? It's not just demoralizing your opponent's school, but demoralizing every single thing that you come across, right? And spreading that demoralization as far as possible. So just as he's about to kill Yamcha, Piccolo interrupts him and orders him to go kill the murderer of Symbol. Murderer, I guess. Because, as we know, Symbol has died. So, being ordered in this way, we see Tambourine's complete obedience towards King Piccolo, and we can start to piece together how, let's say, drone-like some of these demons are that come from Piccolo. And it's to say that the manifestation and the, let's say, the birthing of these demons from Piccolo's self instills that let's say autocratic nature, and so they all bow to the whims of Piccolo. It's almost like Sauron, right? It's
Hmm.
one controlling the rest. It's one ring controlling all the rest of the lesser rings.
Right.
And so as that is manifest, he immediately is controlled. It's not like he has control over his own body almost. It seems like he's immediately stopped, right? And so that that goes to show how far the control that autocratic spirit can have when possessed through these facsimiles like Tambourine and Symbol.
Hmm. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word this sort of observation of what's going on with Tambourine as well. But it's sort of that. So you know the saying, "Speak of the devil,
Mm-hmm.
and he shall appear." Right. And I think of this. You could just cap off this event. You could say what happens in this scene in like 2 seconds, because it's like Bulma says, "There's no way this can happen," so he falls out of the sky, kicks the shit out of Yamcha, and then flies off.
It's like, yeah, it can happen. Now
She
get ready
she
for
like
it.
speak of the devil, like she literally
Mm-hmm.
called this down by saying that it
Yeah,
couldn't
definitely
happen.
called forth.
It's
Yeah.
and it kind of just makes me think of like, for instance, like even the serpent with that speak of the devil. It's like she says the thing that shouldn't be said. She sort of looks at the wrong thing. Her attention is towards the wrong thing, and as such manifests it as something that then or not the heroic, but the masculine spirit necessarily is going to have to contend with now. Like
Sure,
she
yeah,
speaks it
yeah.
into existence.
And it's not necessarily into existence, but it really brings it into their world. And it's
Yeah,
almost if Bulma's acting like,
like she's pulling the heavens down on them. Right.
yeah, but it's Bulma acting as the archetypal female, right? She
Hmm.
embodies that chaos spirit, which also has that tie to nature. And it's almost if she herself as Mother Nature is proclaiming, right, this could never happen. And the greater will, let's say itself,
I know what you're gonna say.
is getting at it, right? No, it's definitely gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah, life.
finds a way,
So.
and so exactly, and so it seems that Balm almost summons him in a
Yeah.
way.
So looking at, I was like, how do I frame this to say that the whole scene is this one circumstance, which is very common in this series, as we've seen, where these events circle around Bulma's inability to accept aspects of the world, like the pirate adventure, ultimately surrounding Bulma's relationship to that masculine spirit. Right now,
Right?
it's more
Yeah.
of Bulma's relationship to a malicious spirit.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that they haven't contended with sufficiently, and it's obvious here because Yamcha gets his ass kicked that they have not contended with malice sufficiently as their own selves. Only Goku has even tried to touch that.
Right.
And it's time for them to grow the F up because Roshi is no longer going to be around to protect them.
It's also an extremely important scene to happen because the first season of Dragon Ball is ultimately a story of Bulma and Yamcha, and they're essentially the
Mm-hmm.
protagonists, right?
Yep.
And then Goku acts things out spiritually, and this is the inevitability where the weaker facsimiles of Goku, who are more realistically instantiated in the world, try to act as Goku and fail.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to see even some of the other less facsimile um, spirits that exist even away from Goku are still not going to be able to be successful. So we'll see in the next couple episodes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so meanwhile, at the South Pole, Roshi, Tien, and Chaozu stand before a large pyramid of ice. Roshi checks the dragon radar and confirms that the Dragon Ball is within this iceberg. Tien then casually uses his Kikoho to shatter the ice, revealing the 2-star ball inside. Chaozu retrieves the ball and it glows in his hand, and that's actually where the episode ends. As they continue to search for the Dragon Balls, Goku continues to pester Yajirobe about his Dragon Ball. Tambourine heads over to Yajirobe and Goku, and the Go
Toward
crew,
their Dragon Ball.
yes, toward the Go crew, kind of languish in their own defeat for a minute. And that's kind of where we leave off.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you wanted to say about number 4 here, where Tien uses the Kikoho?
Just that it proves that he's willing to devote his life to the pursuit of the Dragon Balls, which is walking that
Good, yeah.
path, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
so this is a sort of are you in it or not thing for Tien, and so it seems surprising at first to think that this was something he had to expend some of his life force to be able to destroy the ring. This is to tell you that he treats the gathering of the Dragon Balls as seriously as that now.
Right, it's that symbolic and visual representation, and then additionally, as Chaozu is tied to Tien in that way, he holds up the Dragon Ball and it glows in his hand, and that wisdom is attained by that what do I want to say, embodied spirit of Chaozu, which is that innocence of Tien, right?
Right.
That and his devotion, not his devotion towards pursuing the wisdom of the Dragon Balls in the Kikoho, his, let's say, truth in the fact that he does genuinely want the wisdom, allows the innocence to recover that wisdom that he's seemingly lost. And it's interesting too, because in this sequence we see an entirely different set of characters collect the Dragon Balls than we've ever seen before. And so the wisdom that's being collected is maybe some that Goku's already familiar with, but it's something that Tien needs to expand on his character, let's say.
Right. And the gathering of the Dragon Balls happening here is specifically for Tien, right? This
Yeah.
is Tien's journey to gather the Dragon Balls and act out that pattern in the world so that he can be ready for what's about to happen in the story.
Right, and that's definitely covered in the next episode, and it leads in well to it. So
Right.
I think that brings us to a good spot.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you guys like what you heard, please give us a like. Hit that like button. Hit the bell button for notifications. Hit the red subscribe button if you want to maintain your audience of our videos. We upload new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble. And I think that's pretty much it. So no, I already said that. So I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And we hope you guys have a good night.